So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our AGDN Lunch and Learn series in June. I can't believe we're halfway through the year, but thank you, everyone, for making the time and coming to share a meal with us. And today, I'm really excited to welcome our two guest speakers. We met a couple of months ago virtually, and I'm excited about the opportunity for you all to learn about the work that they do in Central America. I think it's a really interesting opportunity for nonprofits, for us to, in the social impact sector, to learn more about how we can work more directly with academia and research, and you know, the ways to go about that. And hopefully this will give us a little sneak peek into that. So I'd like to welcome our guest speakers, Estela Rivero and Tom Hare, who are here from the Central American Research Alliance at the Pulte Institute at the University of Notre Dame. They're both very accomplished researchers, and I will let them introduce themselves and speak a little bit more about their background and what brings them here today, and then get into their presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. No, it's great to be with you all, and we really thank the opportunity to present the kind of work that we are doing with CARA. We have prepared a brief presentation that we hope opens the floor for discussion about the kind of work we do and how we interact with different NGOs throughout our work. But before delving into our presentation, if Tom allows it, I'll introduce myself because he's the one starting our presentation. So my name is Estela Rivero, and I am a senior researcher with the Pulte Institute for Global Development at the University of Notre Dame. And just so, along with Tom, I co-direct the Central American Research Alliance. We'll be talking more about, or what we normally know as, referred to as CARA. So we'll be talking more about CARA today. But I thought it might be useful to tell you, before we delve into CARA, a little about what the Pulte Institute is. So we can focus on CARA and where our work enters there. The Pulte Institute for Global Development is an institute where we do research that what we call actionable research, which is basically research that has implications for the policy and intervention, policy decision making and interventions, and we focus on low and middle income countries. We sit within the Keough School of Global Affairs, and more than anything, we are the actionable or practical arm of the School of Global Affairs within Keough. I myself, I am a demographer, which means that I work on topics that have to do with population. I look at how population structures or other population factors affect development variables. And I am mostly a quantitative researcher. I've also done qualitative research, which suits perfectly the interest of the Pulte Institute. We do a lot of evaluations and other work with hard data, so I fit very well in there. And with that, I will pass it along to my colleague, Tom.
Thanks, Estela, and thanks for the opportunity, Anna, and to the network to be here with you virtually today. I wish we were in person in Arizona. That sounds nice. It's probably maybe even cooler there, where I'm in St. Louis right now, and I think our heat index is 113 today. So we're learning what it's like to be in hot, dry places. But yeah, and like Estela, I've been working with the region for a number of years. I actually, I think it's always interesting having conversations, especially with representatives from the NGO sector and things like that, because that's the sector I came from and I still most identify with for the most part. I spent a number of years, maybe my first 10 years after graduation, working for a number of nonprofits, some very small in El Salvador and Guatemala and a couple of other places, and then eventually moved on to work with the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative that works in a lot of justice sector reform, justice sector strengthening projects globally. And then I worked on the Central America team there. And then from that, all that experience, or that experience, I really found my passion and my interest in doing what Estela was talking about, that the Pulte Institute was founded to do, and that's really link what's happening at universities and the tools and the methodologies that universities and researchers in general have with the nonprofit sector, and seeing ways that there's a good opportunity for a symbiosis there of these actors who know the situation on the ground very well. They know the people, they have access to certain populations, but they need, they don't have time. Nobody has time to do everything, to really process and think about and systematize a lot of those experiences and that work. And so that's what led me to go and do my doctoral work in public policy analysis with a focus on violence prevention programming in Central America. And then fortunately, through the creation of the Pulte Institute some almost 10 years ago now, watching it grow and these relationships and these partnerships, and we're figuring this all out. People, it's not trying not to reinvent the wheel, but seeing how it best serves, our partners, and best serves the interests of the university and our faculty researchers. But we're really, all said, we're in a very privileged place to be able to sit at the intersection of the good work of people like you all and other nonprofits and NGOs, even some of the state level actors doing their work in different countries, and being able to take those lessons learned and that data and that information and process it and hopefully complete the feedback loop as much as possible to then share what it is we've learned with all the various stakeholders and policymakers to continue to improve and iterate on the work that everybody's doing. So that's what led us to, and I'll start sharing my screen now. If I can, maybe Anna, could you make me a co-host? And while we do that, to just say that I think all that led itself to us looking at how we wanted to engage best with our partners. And we've done this for a number of years in different instances. And like I said, we're not the first people to go out and try to form partnerships, but we looked around at what's been done and what's happening. And we wanted to try to improve upon that, and especially work together with not only university partners, but also think tanks and other researchers, and focus in, given our experience and our interests in one particular region, which is Central America. Now, we're very flattered by the fact that now the university is looking at doing something similar in East Africa, and potentially with the East and West Africa, maybe all of sub-Saharan Africa, and trying to use what we're learning as a model and replicating this idea of partnership. So this, stay tuned for more on those kinds of developments. So today we hope to, as you're having your lunch, talk you through a little bit about what is the Central America Research Alliance, or CARA, how we work, what we're doing, how we collaborate. And then I think one of the interesting discussion topics that we can get into is some of the challenges, that I think we could all identify up front about the kind of working together in this idea of embedding research in what's happening with civil society actors. So first, what is CARA? Why, why would we, this idea of partnership is good and it's important, but we really, in our discussions over the past couple of years within the university and with our partners, discussed, what is it? What is the value add of having, a formalized alliance or partnership? And really, it comes down to this idea of amplifying voices. I think we could all spend we could spend all day on webinars and online meetings, especially now that everybody does them, and learn about a multitude of different things. But really, we saw the opportunity to say, when we put voices together and when we especially raise the voices of our partners from the region in the United States, that has a potential to have greater impact. And we have a couple of examples we can talk through. And that really, as a US-based university, as US-based researchers with access to different constituencies and the ability to convene in the United States, we could really play a role to be that conduit to amplify the voices. And so what we did was we set out to talk with some of our contacts in the region, and going to the history first. We first had the opportunity through a USAID grant to work with an existing group of NGOs and other researchers that were working on human rights and democracy work in the region. And our mandate under that project was specifically to work with those who had anything to do with research or data collection, and use that opportunity to get to know a lot of these individuals, some of whom we knew before, some were new, and survey and see what was already happening at the national and regional level. And to clarify, when we're talking about Central America, for the most part, our strongest membership, or our membership, is drawing mostly from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. We also have one group represented from Costa Rica. So that's kind of where our focus lies, is in Northern and Central America. And we found, there's obviously other networks, other ways of working together existing there, but none with this real research and this applied research focus and look to inform and increase evidence-based advocacy and impact. And so we started working together pretty organically with these groups. With that funding that we had, we did various collaborations for research. We had a couple of conferences together, all the way through 2019 and kind of right until the beginning of the COVID period. But we're really happy with the way that people continue to be engaged despite COVID. We even, anecdotally, our working group in Guatemala would get together on Sunday afternoons in a park where they were allowed to meet, with social distancing and things like that throughout COVID, and work together as civil society actors who hadn't previously worked together that closely in the past. And so we really saw this great, growing space to exchange ideas, lessons learned, and methods that people have used in the region, that we had used, and particularly research methods, both quantitative, qualitative research methods. And so we got to discussing all these developments, kind of in some of those quiet days of COVID, when we weren't able to travel and do other fun things, and thinking about what we could do to really kind of blow on these coals and continue to grow this group together. Because important to note, in the middle of 2019, our funds were cut off for the project we were doing in the region as a part of the administration's cuts to foreign assistance in Central America. So we really had this opportunity of a great group together that all of a sudden lost the funding to be able to continue to do at least our in-person work. So we took this to our leadership in the Fuentes Institute and the School of Global Affairs and others at Notre Dame, and presented them with the idea that Notre Dame could really continue to be the convener, with very minimal investment, and start to bring this group back together under a new umbrella, or a revised umbrella, which we started to call CARA. And so that all started to come together late last fall, and through this spring, really establishing some of our the way we want to work together, what we want to focus on, and how we want to position ourselves for advocacy going forward. So, some of this is a bit repetitive, but why did we see this as something beneficial? As some, what gap are we looking to fill? And we've really realized for those of you who follow Central America, we've seen, especially in these groups of civil society actors and universities, others, researchers working in the region on democracy and human rights, it's a very quickly changing environment. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, especially in El Salvador, but also to a certain extent in Guatemala, and hopes are high for Honduras under the new administration, but some of these closing spaces for this kind of discussion and dialogue and even presentation of information. And so we saw the strong benefit of coming together and that the support that comes from being a part of a network. And we also saw a lot of great knowledge that exists already, that is being produced by universities and NGOs in the region, that maybe it was going a little bit under the radar and could be useful if put in the right hands. And so we wanted to talk about how we could assist with that. We also saw the opportunity to go together to look for resources. A lot of these, the new mantra, at least with the Agency for International Development, who has funded a lot of our work, is a focus on local institutions, particularly in Central America right now. And so helping our partners recognize those opportunities and be able to apply for funds and look at the different opportunities that are available to them. And then again, increasing our impact by uniting efforts and our voices, putting our voices together. So really through the past maybe 6 months of the formal existence of CARA, we've established these 3 main objectives together with the partners in the region. And that's, broadening our network, continuing to grow our network, and looking for opportunities to collaborate, whether that's in funded research, whether that's in research ideas and research agendas, or looking at programs and projects that are ongoing that could benefit from monitoring and evaluation, increased monitoring and evaluation, and other tools. And then sharing and strengthening technical, methodological, and communication abilities. A lot of our time, surprisingly to me, over the past couple of months has been talking about how do we communicate not only our results and what we're learning, but also as a network and as colleagues, and how can we best coordinate when we're not in the same country, region, at the same time. And then raising the awareness of the evidence that's out there, and looking really at this idea of how can we increase evidence-based advocacy in the US and the region. And one of the things, the picture there, just to give an example, is actually Estela on the Hill with a number of our member organizations under the PASS project. I think that was summer of 2019. We were able to bring a fairly large group of researchers and practitioners from Central America up together, and we worked on a brief together on some of the main issues, kind of going beyond the typical discussion of root causes for migration, and then went with them to the Hill, to the State Department and the Agency for International Development, and had these conversations. And one of the things that stuck with us, a student from El Salvador was with us at the time, and she couldn't believe that somebody said in one of the meetings, I forget who, that it was good to hear from quote unquote real people, which was shocking, and a certain, we could have a whole conversation just about that comment. But the takeaway for us was that these, the voices of those who are experiencing what's happening in the region is not getting to the people who are making some major decisions, whether we like that or not, whether we like the role of the US government in the region or not. There's a major role that the US government plays. And the more we can inform them and provide the opportunity for our partners to inform them, the better that intervention, like it or not, will be. And we're looking at doing the same thing as we emerge from COVID, is replicating that on the national scale, with national governments in the countries as well. So that's a plan in the near term. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll pass it over to Estela, is as over the past couple of months, really determining where do we want to focus our efforts as a group? What will our sort of larger scale learning agenda include? And these are pretty broad topics. You could drive a bus through most of them, but trying to make sure we kind of have a sense for who we are and what we want to do, is a focus on human development overall. But a lot of that is kind of, it goes to the equality bullet too, but equitable development, inclusive development, citizen security. That's a strength of a lot of our membership groups and people that we knew beforehand, looking at violence prevention, and then the intersection of violence prevention and governance of the rule of law and what's happening, especially as you look at places like El Salvador, Guatemala, where there's a huge erosion in the justice sector of due process and rule of law and respect for rule of law. And then, of course, migration and displacement is a perennial topic in the region, and making sure that data and information from some of our member institutions. I don't think that we need to update this slide with a few more of the members there. That gives you a sense for who's represented there. And then the picture on the top right is, I think, our last convening before COVID, with a group in Guatemala of researchers from across the region. So that's what we're trying to do together, and I'll pass it on to Estela then.
Thank you, Tom. We are sharing you this slide because we are sharing this slide with you because it's the model that we've come together for CARA's partnership, and to achieve the 3 goals that we have. My video that we have come up with. And the first thing that we want to say here is that our approach is completely collaborative with our partners. And we are thinking of it as a triangle, because on everything we do, we are really trying to not increase, but exchange capacities with our partners. We recognize that we are a very diverse, we have assembled a very diverse group of organizations, and we all come with different strengths. And if anything, we want to build from that. And also in everything we do, we are learning from each other. So formally, the basis of CARA is exchanging capacities and learning from each other. And we do that throughout everything we do, as I said. Formally, that's the most evident way we do that is through organizing training and mentorship. But just working with our partners is another form of a capacity exchange. The second thing is really we are looking for collaborations, and that can be I mean, in terms of working together in projects, this defining what we want to do, what our agenda will look like, what topics we are going to be focusing on. Right now, for example, we are going through an exercise where we are defining our strategic vision for the next 3 years, and we have developed 3 different working groups, and where partners are working together to define a way to communicate with each other, to reach or identify and which stakeholders we want to reach, and also what our training and capacity exchange plan will be. And we are doing that, as I said, all jointly. The stage or the level on our partnership is really conducting research. And we do that as we work with partners, as the University of Notre Dame or the Fuentes Institute work with partners in our own research projects, but we are also trying to get our partners to work together in other projects. So whenever we don't have the opportunity, whenever we have the opportunity to work with a partner on a project in the region, we try to do that. And whenever we cannot work ourselves on a project, we are trying to identify opportunities for our partners to collaborate and work together. So we are not, the other thing is we're not only trying to identify opportunities, we're also trying to get funding and for our partners and to support them in any way we can throughout the process. And finally, we want everything we are doing to reflect on advocacy, what we're calling advocacy. So we can actually get to that goal of, as Tom said, increasing awareness for the evidence that is being generated by us and by our partners. If we can move to the next one, Tom. So what we want to do now is to give you some examples of how we do this in practice. And next, please. So what we have in this slide is a very broad vision of the kind of work that we as the University of Notre Dame do, or actually as we, Tom and I, and other researchers working in Central America in the university at the Fuentes Institute too, and how we work with our partners, with CARA partners. So you can see how this big triangle looks in real life. We plan to get you a sense of the kind of research we do, the kind of collaborations we do, and what we are gaining from our partners from these examples. So we just came up with, for example, recent examples where our work with either partners or NGOs has been diverse. So you get the sense of that. On the first row, from the bottom up, we have the example of an evaluation we did in Honduras of a workforce development program. That's an evaluation that we being the Fuentes Institute, was responsible for, but we are a US-based organization, right? And this actually required that, or we work with with the NGO that was the program implementer. So we were working with Banyan International, who was responsible for designing and taking the intervention to the door in the ground. And what we did to work with them, we were the evaluators, we were external evaluators. And our goal was really to see whether this workforce development, it's a youth workforce development project, was achieving the results that it intended. So in order to do that, we worked with Banyan, who was the implementer, to understand what they wanted to learn from the evaluation. This was a USA funded project. To better understand the context, their learning agenda. So we defined the evaluation questions along with them. But then we also work with them to design their monitoring plan and their data that they were going to be gathering throughout their monitoring visits, which was a fundamental part of our evaluation. So they were gathering the data. We worked with them to train their own staff to make sure that the data they were gathering was good quality, etc. And then we worked with that data, did the analysis, and had met with them regularly to discuss the findings and refine and do any additional analysis. So that's just one form of these partnerships. The second example is a project to decrease recidivism in El Salvador. That's a project that was being implemented by CARA, the Catholic Relief Services in El Salvador. And they actually were working with the Central American University in El Salvador to conduct, UCA, the Central American University, was their evaluation, was evaluating them. What we did is we worked with both CRS and UCA to provide them technical assistance to have a sound evaluation. And in particular, they were interested in learning from our experience gathering data about violence and protective factors in Honduras and in El Salvador. And so we worked with them to review their instruments and to help them refine them. And then we've been interacting with them after that to learn from each other and to, because they ended up, and to see how their tools compared to ours and what we each were learning. A third form of collaboration is when working with a recent project with the Instituto de Estudios de Desarrollo y Sociales in Guatemala, in CEDES. And I'll be talking more about this in the next slides. But basically what we did is an assessment of labor trafficking in Guatemala. And in this case, in CEDES, did most of the research with our technical assistance. Well, we actually defined the project and held the questions, the methodology. We were managing the project and we're working with in CEDES throughout the project to make sense of the data they were gathering. And the fourth example we have is something that just happened recently. Both, I have to say, both UCA in CEDES and this in this last case, SSPAS which is Servicios Pasionistas in El Salvador, are all members of CARA. So in this last instance, as the Servicios Pasionistas was organizing a workshop on citizen security. And what we did is we supported their organization of the workshop and participated in the workshop, presenting our lessons in Honduras. We disseminated the workshop and were co-founders of that. So if we can move to the next slide, please. And we want to talk a little about the human trafficking work we did in UNICEF, because we think it's the best example of how we gain from our partnership, our partners, and how they also benefit from partnering or being members in CARA. The best way to say this is we, as a North American academic organization, wanted to do work in trafficking. It all was very naive, to be honest. One of the donors of the Polity Institute asked what we were, we've been working in migration in the region for a long time, and they knew we have a presence there, and then came to us and asked us what we were doing in terms of trafficking in Central America. And we thought it was easy, right? We are researchers, we learn about new topics all the time, and we started looking desperately for we started thinking about the links between migration and trafficking, and then started looking for proposals and have our wheels turning about, oh yeah, we can think about the project about measurement, and then do an intervention about there's someone working in artificial intelligence in a related field, and we can do this and that, and let's implement it with CEDES. And then we came to CEDES, which is a CARA partner, which is based in Guatemala. And when doing that, we learned that they themselves had done a lot of work in human trafficking in Latin America, actually in the Guatemala-Mexico region. They knew who to speak with, they knew which organizations were working with, they knew the legal framework, and they told us to stop on our tracks. And they told trafficking is very broad, and if you want to learn anything, the area that is less known about is labor trafficking, and that's where we can have a larger impact. So in a sense, they even told us, they help us define some of the areas, right? So instead of going big and starting doing a lot of things, what we decided is to work with them to do a literature review and to do a series of interviews with different stakeholders that are involved in labor trafficking and in general in trafficking regulation, prevention, and protection in Guatemala, to identify what was known of the topic and what was needed as defined for them. And so I'll just tell you very quickly what we learned from doing this. And we wouldn't have been able to do this without them, because as I said, they really knew the context, who to speak with, and they also had the buy-in. So both the lead review and our talking, or instead of talking with them, with the different stakeholders, led us to the conclusions. And I think that labor trafficking is a very under-researched area, or slave work, and that is generally undercounted. And I think, let me actually, to have time, I think we can skip to the next one, Tom. But there also, that there's a need for increased awareness about across the actors that are working on trafficking, of what each is doing, how they define labor trafficking, and also for coordination in the measurement and identification across actors. So that's all we learned in general. Now, what did INSEADES gain from this? I think, we'll be talking. One thing in particular that we learned throughout the process is that when working with some local organizations, they are very focused on the local context, and they are very descriptive. And if anything, what we are bringing is two things. One is the capacity to take the discussion to a higher level and to link it with other fields, but also to identify the linkages with other topics and potential funding opportunities that we have not developed at the time, or they might not have been able to identify when looking only within Guatemala. So if we can turn to the next slide, because what we I mean, we've gained a lot, but we also wanted to conclude with some challenges for at least that apply to our collaboration with NGOs, and particularly when doing research. And I think more than anything, it is all due to differences in the time, the resources, and the scope of the priorities that we as academics, I mean, even when we are an applied organization, have, and NGOs have. Our focus, for example, is on more sound research, less descriptive. So we are interested in being able to make what we usually call external validity, or being able to say something beyond our case studies and link it with a more general discussion. And that it really takes more time. It takes a lot of time. It can be very expensive, not only because we are expensive, but there's a whole infrastructure at the university level that takes a lot of resources. And matching that with the priorities of and resources of local organizations can be challenging. So they tend to prioritize learning about their context. And are less focused on external validity. They also need prioritizing local context, prioritize working with local contacts, local stakeholders. And they also tend to focus, I mean, many of organizations we know want to learn and to know about how they are doing and where they are working, but their focus is on descriptive work. So there's in a sense a different language there. And I see we only have 10 minutes, so about the leave it here. We can talk about the examples later, but I'd love to hear from everyone in terms of their comments and questions. Over.
Are there any questions? I guess I'll start off. Thank you so much for that presentation. And I think I've understood a little bit more about sometimes why it's so difficult for organizations to approach research institutes or academic organizations because of that. Sometimes you know, the different focus, the different priorities. So thank you for acknowledging that and covering that, because I think that sometimes, you know, speaking from the nonprofit organization, I think it's like, well, do they really understand what we want to find out? Are they going to be there for the long haul, right? Or are we just an opportunity for them to touch base with our beneficiaries? So I think that's a really important aspect of research and nonprofit organization relationship to acknowledge and to work around, because I think that there is a lot of potential for a win-win relationship, right, as your work exemplifies. So thank you for bringing that up. Are there any additional like lessons learned from trying to match, I guess, the priorities of an NGO and a university or academic institute?
To go, Tom?
Okay, yeah. No, and I think your experience is probably like many others, right? I mean, I've seen this fail too, in terms of trying to make you know, one of my first projects in the Pulte Institute was actually on, you know, solar systems and entrepreneurship in Uganda and South Africa, something I knew nothing about. So I probably should have just stopped there, but I've been pulled in to try to kind of make these connections between those who are implementing it on the ground and some researchers at Notre Dame. And that was my first kind of real big aha moment of kind of the oil and water and these happened to be nothing against economists, but they were economists that we were trying to bring in. So they needed the right conditions. And they needed, for their research, for them to be able to publish their research in the top tier journals, they needed to dictate the way the program would be implemented for their purposes, which that's a whole nother discussion. But we should have recognized early on that wasn't going to work. And I think and facilitated the discussion to see if there was maybe a common middle ground. I mean, I haven't discounted work with people that need that, but it's recognizing the incentives, I think, was a big part of that, of recognizing that, you know, they're going to spend their time working on this, and to be rewarded in their profession, they need to be able to get that work published in these journals. That's one of the things that through Pulte we've been lucky to do, and other universities have too, by having people like me and Estela who are not faculty members, we're just staff researchers. I shouldn't say just staff researchers, we're very important staff researchers, but we don't work in the same incentive structure. Right. And that really, really facilitates our ability to do good work and work on projects that wouldn't be possible through faculty. And then what our charge, our mandate is to bring in the faculty as much as we can. So we work very closely with a psychologist who's great and a great collaborator. And at the end of the day, you know, she's working on her work and we're working on ours. And if there's an intersection and she gets to publish from it, she's really happy. But she's also at the point in her career now with tenure that she can do other work that isn't as necessary. I should mention that about the economists. They were also seeking tenure, so the clock was ticking for them. So I think that would be like the biggest lesson learned, is recognizing the incentives and having those initial discussions to say, okay, here's what we hope to get out of this. What do you need to get out of this? And if it's not going to work, then we need to all keep moving and find somebody else. Estela, would you add to that?
I could, and I think that's a great example. I wanted to, so Anna said lessons that we are learning. So it's not that, I mean, we are still learning about it, right? And I think to me, and I say it as an active voice, because things are in development. And I'll also bring an example. So recently, I mean, that I was talking with Save the Children in Mexico to try to come up with a project that they actually looked for us because I've done some work on forced marriage among very young women. And that's a topic that they want to explore more. So they looked us to see if we could work with them to update a study that we have done in the past. It was 6 months of talking, and in the end, they decided they want to go with, the report or the study was mostly quantitative, and we had some interviews that allowed us to better understand the conditions of very young women who have, married women who have married very young in Mexico. So when we made up a proposal, we said, well, just as you said, update this and with new data. But there's not much that we can learn from quantitative data. And when doing, if we were to do qualitative work or go into and interview women in different areas, that would be way more expensive. And then they decided, and I think this is key, they work with different organizations in Mexico. Save the Children, they work as an umbrella and work with different organizations. And they decided that they wanted to build the capacity, the research capacity of the organizations they work with. And so they would actually do the research with these organizations. And we cannot do it with you. You're expensive, you could take too long, and that's it. And I was thinking, one thing, I have a PhD. I shouldn't be saying this, but I was supposed to know what research is about, right? And I'm just learning. I think I'm now understanding every day more that what we mean by research, is in a very large part the systematic nature of it. Being systematic in the kind of questions you ask, who you interview, how you interpret data. And I think, if anything, that's one of the things that I'd like to help Save the Children work with, and work with their organization. Yes, they can, I'm sure they can work with their local partners and work with their local organizations. But if anything, I'm trying to work with them to bring that systematic and rigorous lens to what they do, so they can take as much advantage of their work and learn as much of that as possible. So I think the lesson here is probably restricting our collaboration, and we don't need to be doing everything. If anything, restricting how we work with them, and guiding them through the process.
Wow, what a great set of examples. Thank you both so much. I think that for me, definitely kind of brings in a different perspective and awareness about what it really takes to partner with an institution such as University of Notre Dame to get this work moving forward, and also kind of setting the expectation from the get-go of this work takes a long time. And sometimes nonprofits, we're so close to the work, the issues, the ground, that everything is urgent, right? Everything needs to happen yesterday. And sometimes that can create, potential challenges. But thank you both so much for coming today, for presenting to our group.
Is there time for another question?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I was just curious what your experience has been with how much M&E was already in place with the nonprofits that you chose to partner with. Because for me, that's sometimes a conflict when trying to work with an educational institution. We're gathering M&E for continuous process improvement and some other areas that we care about at our nonprofit, but it may not be exactly what the educational institution is looking for in metrics. And I found also with partners that they're more commonly gathering outputs rather than outcomes. And has that been your experience too?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think overall it's a a real spectrum of coming in and discussing with the group. It's some who have done no M&E, others who have a really robust M&E system in place. I think the good example that comes to mind is the Workforce Development Project in Honduras. We were the external evaluators and we weren't doing an impact evaluation, but a performance evaluation. And so we had to tie into their M&E system, and through discussions and deliberations with them, add on to the information that they were collecting, which was mostly process and output oriented, to gather data on using psychometric scales. So it was a full 45-minute tool that we were adding to their intake, for example, and then their exit interviews, that then we took and analyzed, but they recognized the benefit of it. One, to learn from their, what is changing on these sort of less visible characteristics, and two, it saved a lot of time by doing the process together versus having two separate pieces, two different data collection instances of data collection. So we wove our questions into their existing system, and then that way they had the raw data too. I don't know if they ever did anything with it. I think they tried, but I'm not sure exactly what happened to it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The other thing is definitely for smaller organizations like mine. We're small but mighty, but the cost of the data collection, we built ours into the model up front, but we reached sort of a critical mass where we had to put it into electronic form because it was just unwieldy otherwise. So now it's easier for us to add extra questions to our proprietary app that we use, but it's still expensive. It's expensive to analyze the data. It's expensive to, how do I say this, with client time. How much time do you have with each of the clients you're serving, and how much of it can you afford to use for data collection? And we're a healthcare org versus, trying to give them as much assistance as we can in a short amount of time. So it's always a sort of a balancing act there for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, digitizing it is so valuable. I mean, yes, upfront costs and some ongoing costs, but then the time savings of having it in there and the reliability of not translating from paper. I think in the same projects, one of the benefits, if I can say that we brought to their system is they were operating on a paper intake form. And we said, well, as we're doing this, we're not going to do it on paper. And so we'll actually incorporate your questions into our questionnaire, our digital questionnaire. And then that way you can have that readout. That was one of the benefits, I suppose, for them in that system. But yes, it is, there's just certain fixed costs with all of that have to be recognized.
That's actually a huge benefit because nobody's funding that for us on our end. They might be on the academic side, but there aren't grants for M&E for us guys. And I understand the importance because I used to work as an aerospace engineer. So I'm a big nerd and I know the importance of it, but I also know for smaller orgs, that's like to them icing on the cake if they can make that happen. And now it's becoming a more urgent thing because funders want to see outcomes and they want to see data now.
Mm-hmm. But they don't want to pay for it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
If I may add something to that very quickly, I think even when we are both data persons, we really recognize the importance of the costs of data and the importance of only collecting data that will tell you a lot, right? Prioritizing indicators. And we really, I mean, even as CARA, we hear you we can think of CARA as an organization, and Tom and I are struggling to define what indicators we want to monitor, right? Because our partners sometimes don't answer that surveys, and then when it's not costing time, I mean, it all requires time from the, so.
Yeah, and that, I loved your presentation, and when I saw that you do digitize and offer to pull in what they want, that's a huge selling point to little nonprofits, being able to offer that to them. You know, putting that forward at the beginning might help you get more charities that want to partner with you, if that's even an issue for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, good to know.
There's a question for you in the chat box, Tom.
Oh. Oh, yeah, I see it now. Boy, that's a really good question. Not that comes off the top of my head, but let me think about it, and I can pass it to Anna. But yeah, it kind of depends on software. Yeah, let me think about it.
I know that some of our colleagues like using Airtable, but we haven't really used it. So
That was a dream of mine, actually, was to use geospatial modeling to connect data, to make it available to people working in various areas, where you could just click on a map and pull up the data from all the organizations in that area. But that would require an entirely separate organization and separate funding to make that happen. So like I said, it's just a dream right now in my head.
I think David had something. David.
There's two websites that are free and open source for this type of thing. They're both hosted by USAID, so they're primarily USAID funded projects where you'd find this, but there's the Development Exchange Clearinghouse and the Development Data Library. You can get it, even if you're not affiliated with a USAID project, you can get there, and it's basically open source information of projects that have uploaded their learning plans, their research, and then any research that's been funded through USAID, the results have to be publicly available. So either of those are ways to get access to this type of stuff and to share your results with a larger group that's trying to do the same thing. It's obviously limited to one agency, but USAID has a lot of money and they've funded a lot of research around the world.
Yeah. They haven't optimized their search engine yet, though. On
yeah, I upload to it often, so I know that it's a very archaic system, but it's the best that.
Yeah, it's good that it's there.
Whether it's user friendly or not.
Yeah.
And then I also had one question: how do you get involved? So there's, obviously nonprofits. It sounds like they have a research arm or a need, they would reach out to you, but then you have other staff researchers potentially at other universities. Do you have like an advisory board, or do you have meetings about potential research partnerships? Like, how would it look to get involved from a couple different angles?
Yeah, I think, and for anybody that's doing research in Central America, one of the things we prioritized at first was outreach to Central American institutions, but then with the idea always that we come back and see there's obviously people doing great work at Arizona State and University of Arizona, Florida International, Duke. Other people are doing great work in and with the region, and that's kind of a next step. So maybe we could circle back with you about because that was one of the things our Pulte leadership at least mentioned was this kind of, do you bring in, especially if we want to do the advocacy piece, do you bring in people from Washington, from like the Washington Office on Latin America, OAS, and others as an advisory council? But I could also see a role for a similar group of U.S. institutions. So stay tuned and let's stay in touch on that, because I think that's where we want to head as this hopefully grows.
And just to add to that, so that's we're always thinking in terms of Central America as well, right? So that part would be covering the the US front mostly, but our own partners are actually thinking, or a group of our partners are thinking how to create a regional, well, they're actually mapping stakeholders and thinking how to involve regional actors more as well.
Well, keep us in mind. AGDN has a strong connection with those research arms at ASU and at the U of A. So I'll be happy to make some introductions and potentially, you know, grow the connections that way. But I thank you so much. This was a great conversation that we even went over time. So thank you for letting us go a little over, and thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions and engagement. If you have any more questions or want to connect with Estela or Tom, let me know and I'm happy to share their contact information. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll be in touch.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having
the
us
space.
over. We love talking with